I know when we would drive into Lincoln, when my children were smaller, it was, who can see the Capitol first? Can you see it? How many miles away are we? And then who greets us when we get into town, the closer? There he is, the sower. And so we have Greg Harm, who came from Texas and has studied and been fascinated by the sculptor who did the sower, and many other art pieces that we don't know about yet, but at the end of the evening we will. And Greg is not just an expert on Lee Lawrie, but he's also a photographer, a researcher, an author, and it's his evening tonight. Let's welcome him.
Thank you so much for coming. I really felt honored. This is my first event such as this. I have spoken once about him in Lincoln recently, but I feel really honored to be included with this and asked to come here and give the presentation. I've been invited up here. I'm going to be speaking to the Nebraska Library Association tomorrow, and they knew Becky, the manager here, one of the managers or directors here, and so she asked me if I'd come out and give a presentation out here, and I said, sure, I'd love to. And so I'm originally from Lincoln. I've lived in Austin for the last 20 years this fall, but I still have, my brother still lives here, and I still have some family and so on. But anyway, these are going to be the topics we're going to cover pretty much. I'm going to start out with some focus on the sower, and then get into who Lee Lawrie was, some biographical information, focus on some of his work outside of Nebraska, discuss briefly a little bit about Art Deco and the Machine Age. It was kind of an influence on Lawrie, and that influence bled through into his work. I can talk a little bit about the development of the Capitol, how it came about, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about law and the lawgivers, which are, the history of law wraps around the building, and it covers 5,000 years of history. I've got several of the slides from that. I didn't want to go through every one. But anyway, it's a very interesting program. Then the other thing I'm going to do is since we're involved with libraries here, I'm going to have some illustrations about different libraries that Lawrie created sculpture for around the country. So anyway, without further ado, let me try to see how this works. Okay. Next, what we do is we just hit enter on here or something. The spacer. Okay, so we're going to get into the sower here. And like she was saying, everybody in the state pretty much recognizes the sower, but few people, at least in past years, few people knew that it was Lee Lawrie that created it. But Lee Lawrie not only created the sower, he did all of the bas-relief work that's all around the Capitol, much of the architectural detail. I don't know if he had a hand in all of the diagonal stuff there or not, but anyway, he worked with Goodhue for quite a number of years and was very influential in a lot of the design that went on there. And talking about the sower, one of the things about him, Lawrie used this theme of the sower for many, many different applications. We see on the top left up there, there's a medal that he did for the Society of Medalists in 1932, and he revisits the whatever you reap you sow, basically, from, I think it's Galatians from the Bible. The picture on the right there, on the top, that was a display in Philadelphia, a sculpture display that they had there in, I think it was 1931. That's the model, a plaster scale model of the Capitol. This other sower here in the middle of the bottom there, that's on Beaumont Tower, which is a carillon at Michigan State in East Lansing, Michigan. And then on the bottom right here, this is a female sower figure that's on front of one of the buildings at Rockefeller Center. And this is a picture of Lawrie in his studio. His granddaughter gave me this this, I think I'll turn this off. Sorry about that. But anyway, this is in his studio in Harlem, and Lawrie's the guy that's standing right next to the knee of the sewer there in the white shirt. But this kind of gives you an idea, it's like you always see this sewer up this high, and you never get really good appreciation for what the scale is of it. But this is a pretty good representation of that. He worked in a converted garage in New York, and I'd always thought that the garage was probably the size of like a Midas muffler shop or a quick lube type joint or something. But I got a call a couple years ago, and this woman's father, or grandfather I guess it was, he was a 93-year-old man, and his name was May, and apparently his parents had owned this structure where Laurie's studio was. And he said that when he was a boy, he would go with his parents to collect the rent from Lawrie on this studio. And he says, well, how big do you think a garage was? And I told him, like the muffler shop analogy and stuff. And he said, oh no, he says, in Harlem in the 1920s when the garage was built, it was all, Swedes and Poles and Germans and Italians and so on. And he said, and when they first started having automobiles, there were substantial investments. People didn't want to live on the street. So they would build these parking structures that would hold like 300, 200 to 300 cars. So this thing was huge, and there were like, this guy said he always remembered there would be like 15 people there working at any given time. And as I get into some more of the stuff, Lawrie was just, his factory was just a beehive, basically. And I mentioned here, when I grew up, all I knew about the sewer was that I had seen this poster that came out in 1982 that honored the sewer, and it was the 50th anniversary of the Capitol. And I bought the Lubke book there, and then there was a chapter in there by retired architecture professor Dale Gibbs, and he had written about Lawrie. And so I got kind of fascinated with it at that point. And so I had some familiarity with it. And then I also knew who Hildreth Meyer was because I had the poster, basically. That was about my only education with these folks' work. And then these are also Meyer's mosaic in the rotunda as well. So let's look a little bit about who Lawrie was. Well, Lawrie was born in Germany in 1877. His mother brought him to the United States on a ship, the Australian. I looked this up on I had read that he had come over on the Australian. I looked up Ancestry.com or something is where I found the picture. But anyway, I make the statement here that Lee Lawrie was never born. His birth name was Hugo Belling. And his mother ended up coming to Chicago, settled there. She later on, when he was an adolescent, married a Chicago fireman named Charles Lawrie. And the marriage didn't last, but anyway, that's when Belling, I don't know if it was his parents or if it was him, but his name got changed to Lee Lawrie at that time. So it was like adopted. But during that time that he was there, he answered an ad that said, "Boy Wanted." And what it was it was the time of the creation of the 1893 Columbian Exposition, or 1892-1893 Columbian Exposition there, that was the World's Fair. So the event had attracted all of these world-class sculptors from all over the country, and he went and apprenticed with these folks. And that's how he learned, started learning sculpture. And he would make, he would live, sometimes he lived with some of these people in the studios that they had, and he would make little playthings at night. She was pretty poor, and a lot of times she had to put him in orphanages. And he managed to, just by his own talent alone, get this work and get the opportunity to be apprenticed underneath these sculptures. Well, when he was 18, he left Chicago and went to Boston. And at that time, he introduced himself to Bertram Goodhue, who a lot of you are familiar with his name. And he would spend the next 29 years working with Goodhue, side by side daily. And by each man's account, Lawrie created the sculpture on each one of every building that Goodhue worked on, or that Goodhue created. All the sculpture on it was done by Lawrie. This is a picture of Library of Congress, from the Library of Congress I got, that has him with one of his children there. this is my own creation here. This is a Google map, but I just kind of want to point out, it's like most of the concentration of his work, there's a whole bunch of it in here in New York City, but he's got it up here, a bunch of stuff at Yale, he's got stuff all over New England up here, he's got stuff at Birmingham, he's got stuff Louisiana State Capitol here. I can't remember exactly what this one is here in the Carolinas, but he's got stuff in Chicago, up in Minneapolis, up in Michigan, or not Minneapolis, but St. Paul. There was a town here that was a Phelps Dodge mining town, and that was a copper mining town, and it's since played out. It was called Tyrone, and Goodhue built a whole working village there for the people. Goodhue also did stuff in San Diego at a number of military bases, and he did the Los Angeles Public Library. Goodhue also created a number of buildings at Caltech, and I'm fortunately going to go to Los Angeles and Caltech next month and hopefully photograph a bunch more of this work. But the thing is when I grew up here, I'd never heard of him. And it's like I had no idea that, he had anything else than the Capitol. I just, sort of assumed that he was a local guy or didn't really know who he was. But the more I started studying him, the wider I saw his influence was. And this guy, I think, I'm no psychologist, but I think part of the reason he was an extremely shy man. And he has something in his autobiography, which was never published, but I photographed a lot of the documents that are at the Library of Congress. And I spent like a week there in 2006, and I went through like folders like this much worth of folders, photographed it all. I haven't got it all transcribed yet, but I went through all of his photographs and this sort of thing, and got records about his autobiography. But anyway, he indicated either he got beat up because he said his mother would come back and get him, and kids vented on him, so they went nuts and beat him up. And so I think that may be why he turned out to be so shy, because he figured if he bragged about anything, he'd get a whooping. So people ask me how I got into this. Well, in 2000, I went to New York City. My wife had a business trip. She was in meetings, so I got to kind of cruise around the town and take pictures. It was marvelous. Well, we ended up going and touring Rockefeller Center, and when I took the tour, they said, well, this sculpture was done by Lee Lawrie. And I thought, oh, well, he's a Nebraskan, or, he's got some connection with Nebraska. I know he did the stuff on the Capitol. So then we start looking around. Then you come over and these figures here, the one on the left represents sound, the one on the right represents light. And 30 Rockefeller Plaza was originally the RCA building, so it was Radio Corporation of America. This was built like, I think it was around 36 or 37. So television was just on the horizon and hadn't really shown up yet. But it was supposed to represent that the sound was supposed to represent radio, and the light was supposed to represent television. So then the other coincidence is I mentioned that Hilders-Meyer had done the mosaics in the Capitol. These figures here are on the south side of Radio City Music Hall. And I thought, well, that's kind of wild. How did, Lincoln was basically, my dad's from Lincoln, my mom's from out in Alma, and it's like it was a small cow town, basically. I mean, it was like agrarian community, not a big metroplex, but certainly not the kind of place that you would associate as being a hub of, Art Deco or anything like that. So I was just floored when I heard this, okay, so here's two artists that worked on the Capitol. They're there at Rockefeller Center. I thought, this is crazy. So anyway, I was just flabbergasted by it. And plus, just the power of this work, I just saw this and I just thought, holy cats, look at this thing. It's like, the wind's blowing and his beard's going like out at a right angle. His fingers are like, looks like they're like this long. And this is well, people have said that he ripped this off from, there's a painting by William Blake that's a 18th or 19th century painting that has, God creating the universe, and he's got a caliper out there like that. And this is modeled after that. Originally it was supposed to be God, and then Nelson Rockefeller said that he didn't want it to be religious or have any religious baggage that went along with it. So they changed it to wisdom. I think that that line is out of the Bible. And here's the other thing. This is the atlas, okay? This is Laurie's work. He created it, and René Chambellan is another Art Deco sculptor, contemporary of his, worked on a lot of his same projects. And the two of these guys created this. Lawrie designed it, and Chambellan helped with the casting and the engineering of it. And so I often tell people, he's like 14 feet tall or something, but I think that the sphere, from like his toe down to the top of the sphere, is like 42 feet. So it's like, in a sense, it's a longer sculpture than what the sewer is. But I make the reference that he's like, he's like the sewer's little brother, And so, anyway, I'm the only one in the world that says that. But another thing that's interesting here, excuse me, let me get a swallow here. When visiting New York City, Goodhue has a number of churches that he built around there, beautiful Gothic churches. And there's one that dates to the 1920s or so. It's called the Church of the Intercession. Well, it was Bob Ripley, he's the administrator of the Capitol. He was telling me that it was one of Goodhue's favorite churches. So Goodhue requested that he be buried in it. And Lawrie had spent, 29 years working alongside the guy. So Lawrie created this tomb. And the drawing on the left is one that I got from Library of Congress. The photograph there above him is an arch, excuse me, an arc that shows all these buildings that he built. And there's things from, let me get into I think the next slide, if I'm not mistaken. There's a close-up of it. Okay, yeah, this one. I've got some stitching software where you can take a bunch of pictures and then it throws them all together seamlessly. The buildings that are featured in here, there's a chapel at West Point, Rockefeller Chapel at the University of Chicago, Rice University, Caltech, the National Academy of Sciences building in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles Public Library, Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Goodhue worked on it. It wasn't solely his. He was working with Cram and Ferguson at the time, so it's not his. That wasn't his baby, but he worked on it a lot. Sterling Memorial Library at Yale, St. Vincent Ferrar Church, that's in New York City. There's this one building here is this was going to be a skyscraper that was built in New York City called the Convocation Center, and that was going to be in Radio City Music, or not Radio City, but Madison Square Garden, and it was never built for whatever reason. And then there's St. Bartholomew's Church is another one that's, they have big state funerals and stuff like that there, at that church.
Well, question on that, or maybe you're going to it. That building looks like our Capitol.
It is, okay?
It is our Capitol.
And here's the thing. This is at the top center of that arc, and if you're very perceptive, it's the top center of the arc, and it was the largest thing that he ever built. And it was obviously one of his favorites because it's at the top of the heap there. The tower ended up changing slightly. Goodhue died in 1924. This was completed in 1929, but they didn't have the tower finished. So it went through some evolution after that. But I kid people, I say, well, where do you go to see a picture of the Nebraska State Capitol? 155th and Broadway in New York City. But it's very interesting. The church is like in Morningside Heights, and I thought it was Spanish Harlem, but a friend of mine that I went to Lincoln High with, he's been in New York City for 20 years. He said it's more like Morningside Heights is the name of the neighborhood that it's at. But it was a church, the Royal Tenenbaums had a scene where they walked through a graveyard. And that's the graveyard where John James Audubon is buried and so on. Beautiful, beautiful place. And they have all these mausoleums that are all have Tiffany glass in them and stuff. There's a close-up of that. This other one here, this was a memorial that they had proposed to do at Caltech. And you got two maidens sitting at either end of this structure or bench or whatever it is. But then one's got a torch of knowledge on her lap, and the other one at the other end has his masterpiece, the Nebraska State Capitol. But this was going to be a fountain that this was the scale model of it. I got this from Caltech archives. They let me license the photograph. And so that's just a little board. That thing's probably the model's probably about this big. Okay. I call this the book of mine Prairie Deco because what it is it's all regional themes that are kind of infused with Art Deco. And it was popular. Lawrie wasn't the only guy doing this, but you know, he was one of the, he didn't really copy anybody either. All of his artwork was original. One of the things that he would do, and I pointed out in the book, on the north side of the Capitol, there's wisdom, justice, wisdom, power, justice, and mercy, the constant guardians of the law. But when he first modeled these in the early 20s, they were like really Greek looking. The surfaces of the models and so on, very round, very naturalistic looking. Well, as time went on, he kind of flattened them out and made them all more geometric. And the beards on all the guys on the Capitol, they all had these geometric waves in them and stuff. And so, one of the other things about the history of law is that as the panels wrap around the building, one of the things that they do is they kind of graduate in style. They start out like in these Babylonian and Assyrian styles, and then they become more contemporary as they wrap around the building, which is kind of novel when you stop and think about it. Okay, there's the cover of the book. It's got a blueprint on the back, just to show you what it is. Here's the subject matter that I cover in the book, and a lot of it is just, I discuss, you know, the regionalism. I give some of Laurie's philosophy, what he advises to young sculptors. I talk about logistics, and I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. And then symbolisms and inscriptions. Talk a little bit about Indian heritage, pioneers, and so on and so forth. We're going to cover some of this tonight, but not all of it. This poster here I got out of a book called The Machine Age. And the term Art Deco was one that was not actually coined until 1966, but it makes reference to this Exposition Internationale Art Decoratrice Industrialis Modernis or whatever. So anyway, this was an Art Deco, or this was a design fair that was held in Paris in 1925. They apparently had wanted to do it in 1919, but the war was going on, or there was too much damage from the war in order to do that. But one of the things that evolved during this time was the post-war was a very drastic period of change, because a lot of people wanted to see things simplified. They felt that, like in architecture, for example, they started to begin to say that, you know, decoration on buildings was just taking, you know, food out of kids' mouths and stuff. That it was a waste of money. But anyway, as the society developed, or as American society developed especially, you start getting into consumerism, and Art Deco is just this movement. Part of it is influenced by, this was just after like the discoveries of King Tut and so on. And then there were some of the discoveries of Mesoamerican ruins and this sort of stuff, kind of an Aztec influence and that sort of stuff. And some of the papers that some of the photographs that Lawrie had in his archives were photographs of Mayan examples and stuff. But this was in that book about the machine age, and this is just typical of, you know, the kind of geometric influence of the Art Deco period. You see this thing in fashion, and like cigarette cases and lighters and all sorts of things. This was a futurist automobile. They were getting into this streamlining thing. They wanted to make machines better and faster and so on. Norman Bell Geddes was a futurist, and he designed a lot of various things. But you know, they even got into consumer goods. But one of the things that I tell people about the machine age that was remarkable is when you stop and think of it, Lawrie and Goodhue was 54 when he died. Both of these guys were born in the late 1800s. So when these guys were born, you know, everything was manual labor. There were no tractors, there were no combines. There was just all this drudgery of work. So you can imagine, you know, it's like those guys, I'm 58, and it's like I'm 4 years older than Goodhue was when he died. But when you think about when these guys were kids, you had to split wood, you had to haul coal, you had to pump water, and all of these things. So the machine age was like, it was an end to drudgery for these folks. And it was very, very much, you know, such that it wasn't just a psychological thing. Well, it wasn't just a purely mythical thing. It was a physical thing where you had less work to do and so on as you would do your life, anything from housework to transportation. So all of these influences help to facilitate the machine age. And on here, this is this is above the north. I'm sorry that that's not showing brighter than it is. But anyway, this is wisdom, justice, power, and mercy, constant guardians of the law. And this is another thing that I point out, and sadly from this photograph it's not that easy to discern, but when you see it in print it is. Or if you go up and look at it. She's got little torches of knowledge on her helmet here. He's holding scales. He's got a sword that's half drawn. And then she's got her arm around a little lamb that's leaning up against her. So the point, this is one of Alexander's themes, that as when law is administered, unless it's fair, unless it's equally applied, unless it's just and merciful, in other words, power can be abused very easily. So it has to be tempered with all these different elements. But then also the point of this being that, and that slide was because they're all real good examples of the streamlining that was taking place. These are images of corn and a bison skull, and then these are all capitals, which are the tops of columns that were used. And those use the prairie influences. The top left column there, column capital, that's got corn. This one here has wheat. That's grain or something on that other one. And then the bottom right one there, it has cattle. And one of the things that they stressed in the capital was that the maize and the bison that fed the Native Americans was replaced by the corn and cattle that came in and created the industry of the state, basically. These are on the north doors. These are really fascinating. These are just scenes from Native American life here. And these are Lawrie used on a bunch of different buildings throughout his career. He would go really nuts on artistically designing these bronze door grills. You see, you've got a couple of hunters here, and they're hunting like antelope, and there's a wolf there on the bottom right. And then the ribs on the doors there, they're all arrows. And you can see arrowheads at the top, and then they've got feathers on the bottoms. And plus, okay, and this is a close-up of like an antelope. And then I just love this buffalo head design. To me, it's just so emblematic of the way he would look at these designs, and he would just distill them down to their very essence and streamline, make them less detail. But he'd have less detail in it, but it would actually make it more dramatic in a lot of ways. These are the bison that are on either side of the front stairs of the Capitol, called the North Portal. But one of the beautiful things about this is all of the geometric curls and stuff on these bison. And then you'll notice, like when it shows the grains and stuff like that, all the little kernels of corn are like perfect circles. And then here again, here's the one of the buffaloes on the governor's fireplace. And you note, like in its bangs or whatever, I don't know what you call them, but like its mane or whatever, but it's all these geometric designs. Then on the top right over here, if you've been in the what they call the Warner Chamber, it's the chamber behind the Indian doors. But there's these columns up there have these Mayan-looking skulls carved into them. Just really dramatic. And then a lot of the other columns throughout the building, they're modeled on beadwork. They have these geometric beadwork designs on them that they got from Dr. Alexander, who was a pro on, or an authority on Indian culture, provided a lot of these details. In the railing around the rotunda, you've got the local prairie themes of metal arcs and the cattle skulls. Pendentives are the base of a barrel vault. They're the arch, what supports the arch. Okay, and he made a series of these blocks, and these are like 10 or 15 feet up in the air. You can barely see them, but they've got like skulls carved in them. But they've also got like the scales of justice. They've got the Roman fasces carved in them. They've got an anvil, which was considered the emblem of the state, and a number of designs. Those are in one of the Senate lounges where there's you can go on private tours sometimes and get to see it. And then again, the pioneers. This is right above the door. So I've always loved this. It was pointed out when I was researching this that, you know, you got 4 generations there. They got the baby, you got the parents, you got a young man with a bag of seed on his head, on his shoulder, and then you've got the grandfatherly figure. And they're coming into the west, and you can see the sun sinking over there, and then there's like cactus down there, and bison skulls, and all this stuff. You know, the other thing I tell people about the Capitol is it's like an Easter egg hunt. You know, it's like drinking from a fire hose because there are all these images there, and you just can't. It's hard for you to absorb them unless you know where to look. There's the Red Man's Tree of Life. It has thunderbirds in it and corn. Excuse me. And the colors from this thing were taken from Indian beadwork. The doors have been varnished. They varnished them to try and protect them and stuff early on. All that stuff is kind of yellowed a little bit now. But I don't think that the technology is quite there for them to, you know, go in and strip it off or do something like that without jacking them up real badly. And then again, this is one of the things about that Alexander stressed was that the building was supposed to serve as a memorial to the World War I soldiers killed from Nebraska. There were 751 Nebraskans killed. So it started out as, and early publications refer to it as a memorial capital. But it was also a house of state, and then it was also supposed to be the building, the symbolism and the inscription on the building were supposed to teach, you know, honor the Indians, and then also teach or honor the institutions of government that the Europeans brought with them into the community, or into the state when they settled it. And that's, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So anyway, those are those themes. Okay, and when the old Capitol was crumbling around right around the time of World War I. So after the war, they had a competition. They had 10 Nebraska firms and 10 national firms were competing for this. And I guess I've covered some of this other dialogue already. But anyway, the big magic 4 of artists involved in the Capitol. Top left, you got Goodhue. This picture on the right, this is off a magazine I've got of Hildreth Meyer. That's from 1941. So this is, you know, 20 years after she had done the work at the Capitol. And then that's Lee Lawrie there on the bottom. And then this is a picture I got from the Historical Society of Dr. Alexander, partly Burr Alexander, when he was like entering college or something, when he was a youth. But like I say, he went on to Columbia, New York, to get his doctorate. So he was a brilliant guy and very versed in Native American themes. Plus, he had this just humongous understanding of the events of history. This is a picture of the Capitol from Goodhue's original design submission. And if you've seen the north side of the Capitol, you know it looks almost nothing like this. You still have the pioneer panel there, but then there were all these other kind of figures up there, above there, and a lot of the, you know, kind of the story of the Capitol is that the design changed as time went on. This guy, this is Thomas Kimball. Now, Kimball was one of the guys that was judging the architectural the competition for the Capitol. And this guy, he came out to Omaha from back east somewhere. I don't know if it was Rhode Island or something like that. But he had gone to MIT, and he had also studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which is like the creme de la creme of design schools, architecture schools. This is a church that, I got this from the architectural librarian at the Capitol, or not the Capitol, at the University of Nebraska. But this is a church that he designed in Minneapolis. It's a fairly Christian Zionist church. But it looked to me like, it almost looks like Buck Rogers or something like that. It's so radical in its design. But anyway, this guy was regarded as one of the best architects in the country. And he was the president of the American Institute of Architects, not just the Nebraska chapter, but the whole national chapter. And so anyway, he was very influential in bringing like modernism to the judging. In other words, he wasn't a stodgy old guy. He was cutting edge. Now these pictures here, I had a buddy, I went to Lincoln High, got out in 71. This classmate of mine, Kim Clausen, is an architect in Chicago. And when I first told him about my interest in Lawrie, he was saying that when Goodhue built the Capitol, that he had all these other influences. Top left there is a church called Kallio Church. That's in Helsinki. That was by a guy named Lars Sonck. The top right is Ariel Saarinen, who went on to do a number of contemporary buildings in the United States, but that's in 1919, that railroad depot there, railroad terminal. The bottom left is the Hagia Sophia, which is like from the 6th or 7th century. It's in Istanbul. And then Goodhue ended up kind of fusing these designs together. We took the towers and added that to the kind of horizontal profile that the Hagia Sophia had. So we kind of fused all these elements. Now this is interesting. When they first did the Capitol, Alexander had prescribed a whole bunch of figures to represent like trappers and woodsmen and telegraph operators and all kinds of different occupations, surveyors. And the domes of the Capitol there at that time, Goodhue had a lot of Spanish influence in his architecture. He did a bunch of stuff in California that was very much Spanish influence. And so they had those figures there, and they had, each side was supposed to represent a different aspect of Nebraska culture. And then on the corners of the turrets were going to be Indian chiefs and so on. This is one that you may not have seen before. This guy that I've met just through talking on eBay and stuff, or visiting on eBay, he's got a watercolor that he got. This is from Goodhue Associates. You can see up there on the top of the turrets, at one time they talked about putting giant buffalo statues up there. Now these things would have been the size of a dump truck or a motorhome, so they would have been huge. But you notice too the different aspect of how the top of the tower looked at that time. This is another evolution of how they still had the Spanish top on the dome, but the bottom of it, the bottom part of it got a little more modern. You may not have seen this either. This is when they built the Capitol. They built it on the same lot as the existing Capitol was. They kept using the existing Capitol and slowly demolished it as they superseded it with the new one being built around it. So it's like, we're Nebraskans, we're practical people. It's like crazy practical. You know. The other thing I tell people is, it's like a lot of times Goodhue always wanted to build this thing in New York, but really, because of the size of this thing, the footprint of this thing, you'd have to be richer than Rockefeller to be able to get that much property in Manhattan. So, I tell people it's like Martians came down and put this thing here. It's so different, it's so radical. Okay, I'm going to talk about logistics. I mentioned this earlier. These are all plaster maquettes. Maquettes are just nothing more than a plaster model. But what Lawrie would do would be create these models in a studio in Harlem. Then he'd ship them out to Nebraska by train. Then his team, his trusted man, Ardolino, would carve them all in place. And he had like 13 or 15 stone carvers that spent 13 years carving these designs on the building. The maquettes that I had just shown there, those, after the construction was finished, they put them in Morrill Hall up on the 3rd floor. And Professor Gibbs told me that there was and I can't remember the architecture professor's name, but he was going by Morrill Hall one time and saw all this stuff flying out the windows. Then we went over to look at it, and there was a big heap of this stuff. It was all these maquettes, these models. And apparently workmen had been told to get rid of them, and so they just pitched them. But luckily, Gibbs had there was a grad student in 1965, his name was Richard Hill, and he ended up there was a Japanese-American photographer that worked for University of Nebraska for a number of years. His name was Kaz Tada, and he was apparently a guy that had been from the Seattle area. He was put in the internment camps when he was coming up, when he was young or something. When he got out of there, when the war was over, he came to Nebraska with Wesley, and then I think he spent his entire career as a photographer for the University of Nebraska. But anyway, he's the one that took all those photographs we saw just in the previous slide. Not only was Lawrie an extremely busy man, these are all the different projects that he was working on at the same time that he was working on the Nebraska Capitol.
Well, can we go back to the maquettes for just a second? So they were destroyed?
Well, Those are the surviving ones. Whoa!
Some survived.
Yeah, some survived.
Okay.
I don't know how to go backwards in this thing.
Try your left arrow.
Huh?
Left arrow on the keyboard.
Oh, left arrow on the keyboard. Okay. Okay. Well, there you see Penn Tower. You see St. John, Socrates, half of the panel of the Magna Carta, St. Louis, a panel from the west, Ezekiel, the Indians from the Warner Chamber, one of them. There's Sir Isaac Newton. There's the Abraham Lincoln model. That next panel that's horizontal there, that's Burke defending the rights of the colonists in the states. Next one over is statehood. Bottom left is Plato declaring his republic. Two of those others are capital maquettes. And then the bottom right is the Judgment of Solomon picture. And I think
your list there of well constructed, second from the bottom says Louisiana State Capitol.
Yes.
Have you ever been there and seen that?
Yeah, I went over there a year ago and took pictures of it.
Well, it's just like the Central Spire.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty much a copy of well, it's like a mini clone of Nebraska's. It's only got say like a head and shoulders, if you would, instead of like having the big cuneiform or the big crisscross design like Nebraska's Capitol has. It's just got two wings on it, and one of the things there's all these sculptures of like black loggers and steel workers and cotton pickers and all that stuff. The resources and natural resources of Louisiana that go around. Lawrie did all of that sculpture there. At the same time, he was working on Nebraska.
Same time.
From New York City, he was doing all this stuff remotely through his crews and stuff. It was just insane. I mean, you know, it's like we try and you order something from LL Bean and you freak out if it's late getting there, or something from the UPS guy. And it's like, when you think of what this guy was doing. This top shot, that's Bach Tower in Florida, Riverside Church in New York. This is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Bridge. That's a detail of the pelicans on the Louisiana State Capitol. They're about halfway up, but they're up there, and there's palm trees and magnolia trees. The next one down is a picture of the periscope, like a U-boat periscope coming up through the sea. The sea's all geometric there. That's in Harrisburg, and the picture on the right is from Philadelphia. It's got an Indian and a locomotive, and that's representing North America. That's on the Fidelity Life Insurance building. This picture here, this was at Caltech, and that's gone. They tore it off in the 60s, remodeled it, beautified it, modernized it. And below there, that's at the Bank of Hawaii. So Goodhue was even working on stuff in Hawaii before he died. I'm talking more than I should, but I'm going to kind of speed it up as we go through some of the rest of this, just to make sure I don't leave you hanging here. These are the lawgivers. Remember, it's a House of State, so this is where legislation is made. There's Hartley Burr Alexander. He was the guy that came up with a thematic program. He's standing there, and you can kind of see the relative size to Hammurabi there. Then there's Solomon, and then Moses and Akhenaten, Charlemagne, Minos, Napoleon. A lot of people don't know that these figures are there. And the history of law, just to compress 5,000 years into just a couple minutes here. Basically, it starts out with kingly law, then you go through Greek and Roman times where you get the establishment of written law. It used to, like, it was all tribal before that. You know, everything was passed down, it was lore, it was legend, and so on. Then finally, when it got to be written, you know, you developed constitutions and so on. And then you started getting things like Plato's Republic and more developments in it. These same kind of events, this is the written law part. These episodes here, and you can study a little bit more about these on your own rather than have me tell you the whole story about them. But these basically were, the bottom one had to do with a play called the Areopagitica or something like that. I'm not a Latin scholar. But anyway, there was this play about Clytemnestra or whatever with Agamemnon. Anyway, he ends up she murdered his father, so he murdered her, or something. It was one of these. It was a soap opera type deal from 2,000 years ago. It was a play, but it brought out the fact that they were going to have, it led to the development of juries judging people instead of just either one official or not. And then there's the Tribune of the People. This is a codification of English law. It started out in the 6th century in England. Then you got the Magna Carta down there that has where you got habeas corpus. If you're detained by the government, they have to prove that they have legitimate cause to hold you. Las Casas was a monk in Hispaniola or Haiti, that area, San Salvador, whatever that region is, Dominican Republic now. Hispaniola, I think it was called at the time. But anyway, the Europeans were oppressing all the natives into slavery on their sugar plantations. So he's pleading in front of Isabella and Ferdinand and Isabella, the same king and queen that enabled Columbus to come over, that the Native Americans should have same rights as Europeans. Mayflower Compact, that was one of the first developments of law in the New World. Louisiana Purchase, that brought French law into the United States. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, that was in 1854, and it decided whether states that were entering the Union would be free states or slave states. And then there's the Emancipation Proclamation. You can see the guys got their broken shackle or broken wrists, chains on their wrists still. It was a statehood into the Union, 1867. And then I'm just going to kind of fly through these because I've spoken longer than I thought I was going to. I want to allow for some questions. But he did major work on significant libraries around the country. One's across the street from the U.S. Capitol. These are figures of mythology and literature and so on that appear on those doors. This is from, the building was built in 1931. Also, I think it was 31 or 34. Either immediately at the same time as the Nebraska Capitol or immediately after it. But all of his designs, his figures are so dramatic. I don't even know who all these gods of mythology and stuff are. That's their names. But you've got like Odin and Ogma apparently was one of the founders of Celtic language, which was new to me. This is really neat. In Harrisburg, they've got the theme of what the education building was arts and industries, and they were trying to show young people different occupations that they could go into. So there's all these bronze doors that have all these different figures in them, and you've got like, people running a punch press, you've got surveyor tools, you've got, in that, one of the columns in that second to the left, or second one in from the right, you've got railroad steel there, you've got chemistry tools, surveyor tools, you've got architecture, and people with reaping and sowing over here, and gears and miners drilling. But these figures are just very dramatic. There's another close-up, shows a lineman and a lathe operator and some surveyor tools. This is on the back of the building is rectangular, and it's got an amphitheater or something on the side, or not an amphitheater, a theater on the side that's in a semicircle. And these are some of the doors over there, but they have all these figures from drama and the arts and so on. Like there's an Indian there that has a buffalo headdress on. This was Goodhue designed. This is Sterling Memorial Library. This is at Yale. This is a plaster model or a picture of it that Rene Chambelon's grandson, Bob Perron, sent me. He lives in Pennsylvania, but he's kind of into this kind of art like I am, because it was his grandfather. But there's a picture of the whole building, and Goodhue had done the original design on it, and then James Gamble Rogers finished up. This again was done at the same time as the Capitol was being built. So he had all this sculpture going on. Some of these pictures are not as crystal clear as I wish they were, but over the left arch you've got cavemen, you've got ancient Egyptians doing writing, you've got Persians, and then as you get further to the right you get cuneiform writing, and then you get Hebrew scripture and so on. And it's just kind of the development of languages. This is interesting. This one has, you can see the hieroglyphics that the Egyptians carving there, and then an Assyrian, whatever those critters are that are the winged lions. And then as you go on, he's got all this iconography. You got Romulus and Remus there under there being fed by the wolf that founded Rome. Then you've got Greek alphabet there, and you've got the Aegean owl, or the Athenian owl right there. That was a design that he used over and over. He's just got little key sets at the National Academy of Sciences. They're like this big, and they're brass, and they're that owl, same owl with the big old bug eyes and stuff. This is a caricature that's on the Sterling Memorial Library, a drinking student. He's got a big old mug there. We got pictures of naked ladies behind him. So college apparently hasn't changed that much in 100 years or whatever. This is Los Angeles Public Library. There's another Goodhue building. This is right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. But just some of the, again, some of the very dramatic sculpture that appears on it. This is kind of a plethora. Again, I'm throwing more images at you than faster than I'd like to do that. But anyway, again, there's a porpoise, a series of porpoises swimming under there, and he's riding like a seahorse. It's Proteus, and that's part of this larger figure over the doorway. This is called the track racers. And so this gets into the summary. I kind of recap in the book what I like people to know about is that, you know, everybody knows him for the sewer, but it's like he's done so much more than that. He's got such stuff. When I started studying this guy 10 years ago, you could go in and look at any college library book that was about sculpture, and you'd never find his name. You might find it in a book about Art Deco, but by and large, he just went under the radar of the whole academic community. And so you can once in a while find things about that mention him. But the thing is there's no, like when I showed you the Google map, he's got these little pieces that are all over the place. And when you think that back he did this at a time before there was fax machines or emails or jet air travel, you know, most of this stuff, you know, his biggest period was between the wars. So all that, every time he had to, you know, like to Nebraska, you'd have to take a train out here. If you had to go to Los Angeles, you'd have to take a train. If you had to go over to Honolulu, where they installed the stuff on the bank over there, you'd have to take an ocean liner, you know, to get over there. And so it's like when you stop and think about how far this guy went. You know, Louisiana, he's got stuff in Duluth, Minnesota, or not. I think he's got one deal in Duluth that's Itchy Gooey Club or something like that, and then he's got another, you know, the Ramsey County Courthouse in St. Paul, Minnesota was another thing that he worked on. But anyway, I've kind of been like an evangelist for him. You know, I'd like to see people. I'd like to see, you know, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, that he's as recognizable as Norman Rockwell or Thomas Hart Benton or some of these other artists that you think back, oh yeah, those were the artists that were, you know, popular in the Depression or WPA era and stuff. Well, this guy he probably created more of a prolific volume of work, probably more than any of them, collected, you know, not collectively, but individually. And the fact that he started his career in the Gaslight era. He was still working when he was 85, like 8 days before they took him to the hospital and he died. And, you know, so he worked from the Gaslight era to the space age. And he worked the whole time. The biggest, the saddest thing is that Art Deco, I tell people Art Deco only lived about as long as James Dean did. You know, it was just like 2 decades and it was done. And so he had spent his whole life as an architectural sculptor. And then when the World War II was over, they went to the international style. So here he is in 1940, he moves to his, you know, the Depression cleaned him out basically. He threw in the towel, goes and buys a farm in eastern Maine. But he ended up continuing to make like memorials and doing some degree of sculpture, even though buildings weren't getting anymore. But the biggest irony, like I say, was he put his whole life into this, and just when he's, you know, getting ready to step into retirement, when the whole bottom falls out of the demand for architectural sculpture, it was just gone, it was over, because everything was now glass and steel towers and so on. So anyway, but that's about that covers most of what I wanted to tell you folks about. Another irony, this is his grave. It's a headstone, you know. And it's like this guy who built all these monuments and skyscrapers and all this stuff, he ends up getting buried, and this is a picture of him when he's an old man. He's got about 24 cats running around him. This is a picture of the folio. I'm going to try and play this thing real quick. And I don't know if the sound will work on it.
Try.
That's a crapshoot, baby. We'll see if this works or not. But this was a folio that he developed in 1936 that